Some wounds don't come from shouting, they come from silence. Not because someone said something wrong, but because they chose to say nothing at all. They disappeared without a word, leaving you to wonder if your existence ever mattered. That silence doesn't echo, it lingers. Still you stayed, not because you didn't notice their distance, but because you hoped. You hoped the coldness was just temporary, that the silence meant they were tired, not gone. But in time you learn, some people don't hurt you by what they do, but by their absence, by the decision not to be there when it counted. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "When someone does wrong to you, don't respond with anger or sorrow. Let it pass. What they've done reflects who they are, not who you are. And that's your power. You don't need revenge. You don't need to explain. You only need to stay silent, walk away, and let the universe take care of the rest." If you've ever felt invisible, press like and subscribe to receive more Stoic messages to help you heal, awaken, and rise from the darkness with calm that nothing can shake. Number 1, the silent wound. Some wounds don't bleed. They don't come from harsh words or violent actions, but from absence, cold, gradual, and intentional absence. You try to speak, but your words echo back like whispers in an empty room. You send a message, no reply. You show up, they vanish, and still, you stay. At first you comfort yourself. They're busy, they're stressed. Maybe I'm asking for too much, but over time the truth becomes harder to ignore. You are slowly being erased from their world, not through cruelty, but through silence. And that perhaps is the most painful part, not the rejection itself, but the empty space that forces you to question whether you even exist to them anymore. The usual reaction is to try harder, send another message, lower your expectations, shrink yourself, hoping that silence will turn into care. But the smaller you become, the more you disappear, until one day you no longer recognize the person staring back at you. The light within you is still there, but it's dimming, starved of being seen. And then something clicks. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If someone can prove me wrong, I will gladly change, but I must be convinced, not forced." Presence works the same way. If someone truly wants to stay, they will. And if you have to chase them just to feel noticed, they were never really there to begin with. Stoicism teaches us to observe, not react. When someone pulls away, let them. When words fall silent, listen to what the silence is saying. And most of the time, it's saying this: "You're not important enough for me to maintain the connection." That doesn't reflect your worth. It reflects their limitations. So instead of responding with despair, respond with dignity. Pull your energy inward. Pour it back into your own soul. Let silence be a mirror, not a sentence. Ask yourself this: are you seeking connection, or are you holding on to someone who's already gone? That's where emotional wisdom is born. Not in confrontation, but in quiet clarity. You pull away, not because you no longer care, but because you're learning to care more for yourself. You stop sending messages into the void. You stop justifying a love that's half there. You stop playing a side role in the story of your own life. Seneca once wrote, "The brave man is free," and sometimes bravery looks like silence, like letting go, like choosing peace over chaos. That's the power of Stoicism, not in force, but in the silent return to yourself. Let them go. Let the silence speak, because what they haven't said with words, distance has already made clear. And now you don't need their explanation. You have your own clarity. Number 2, the trap of prolonged silence. At first you thought they were just busy, that the silence was only temporary. You didn't want to disturb them. You didn't want to be a burden. So you waited a day, then a week, then a few months. And slowly, you learned to live with absence without even calling it by its name. You kept sending messages, you still cared, you still tried to connect. But what you received in return was nothing but emptiness. Faded replies, or worse, absolute silence. And to protect yourself from the pain, you began lowering your expectations. You told yourself, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. But the truth is, that's not weakness. That's the sign that you've been caught in a one-sided connection, where you're trying to hold on to someone who has quietly already let go. Some people don't walk away with their feet. They leave with their eyes, with indifference, with the way they're no longer present when you need them the most. They may still be in the room, still sharing the same space, but their spirit has withdrawn. And what hurts the most is not that you are unloved, but that you no longer know if you're even worth caring for. Stoicism teaches us this. It is not events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. If you see someone's indifference as a warning, you become alert. But if you see it as a challenge to overcome, you'll stay trapped in a hope that leads nowhere. So treat silence as an answer. Not every relationship needs a clear goodbye. Sometimes absence is the quietest but truest form of ending. Stop asking, why did they change? And start asking, why am I still holding on to someone who's no longer here? I once watched a close friend fall in love with a kind man, but an emotionally distant one. He never betrayed her. He never spoke harshly. He simply wasn't there. Whenever she needed comfort or a simple embrace, he chose silence. She kept trying, because technically he hadn't done anything wrong. But that was the real problem. Kindness isn't just about not doing harm. True kindness is presence. Being there when the person you love needs you. Then one day she stopped messaging, stopped checking in, stopped trying, and he did nothing. No questions, no effort, no response, and that silence. That was the clearest ending she ever received. There were no arguments, no final conversation, just enough calm to realize some people left a long time ago. They just haven't walked out the door yet. Number 3, when kindness is mistaken for weakness. There's a bitter truth that everyone will face at least once in life. You give from the heart, but the other person receives it carelessly. You forgive, and they dismiss it. You stay patient, and they push further. You wait in silence, and they grow more distant. And then quietly, you begin to wonder, am I still loving, or am I slowly hurting myself? Not everyone deserves your kindness, but what cuts deeper is when the one receiving it isn't just ungrateful, but uses your patience as an excuse to act irresponsibly. They don't have to say cruel things. They simply behave as if there's nothing about you worth keeping. You tell yourself that if you're kind enough, good enough, understanding enough, they'll recognize your value. But the more you give, the more you're left behind. The more you stay silent, the more they disregard you. And the more you try to save the relationship, the lonelier it feels. Epictetus once said, "Never let others determine your sense of dignity." Stoicism doesn't teach you to close your heart, but it does teach you how to draw boundaries. Not everyone is worthy of the love you offer. Not everyone is mature enough to receive love without wounding the one who gives it. When your kindness is taken for granted, when your silence is seen as consent, when your giving only leads to pain, then it's time to stop. Not because you no longer care, but because you've cared too deeply, all on your own. I once met a woman who told me her husband never cheated, never raised his voice, but he was never truly present either. Every time she shared her feelings, he called her too sensitive. Every time she went silent, he assumed things were fine, until one day, she left without a word. Only then did he call, apologized, cried, but it was too late, because she had realized something vital. Kindness is not a test of another person's loyalty. It is a gift, And if someone doesn't know how to hold that gift, losing it isn't a tragedy. It's the natural consequence. So if you must choose between your dignity and your attachment, choose your dignity. Because love that's truly worthy of you will never ask you to lose yourself to keep it. And the moment you stop trying to prove your worth, the right one will never make you feel like you have to. Number 4, when you hold everything in and they don't even notice. Have you ever been in this place? You miss them, but you don't dare text first. You feel sad, but you stay silent. You're hurt. But instead of speaking up, you comfort yourself with, "It's nothing. I'm just being too sensitive." And over time, you begin to withdraw, not because you're fine, but because you've grown used to your emotions going unheard. You start keeping everything to yourself. Not because you lack trust, but because every time you open up, you're met with indifference, with shallow replies, or worse, avoidance. Slowly, you learn to endure on your own. You learn to hide your tears behind a smile. You learn to soothe your wounds by whispering, "I'm fine," even when you're not. But here's the truth. No one deserves to love in a way that turns them invisible inside their own relationship. Stoicism teaches us, do not expect others to bring you peace if you cannot find it within. But that doesn't mean you're meant to live in emotionally disconnected relationships where you carry the weight of both people's feelings alone. No one should love in solitude like that. I once knew a man who tried his best to keep peace in the family. He never complained. He never fought back. He simply stayed quiet. Every time his wife seemed cold, he told himself, "She's just tired." Every time he felt hurt, he blamed his own sensitivity. But over time, he wasn't himself anymore. His energy drained, his confidence faded, the vibrance he once had disappeared. One day, he said something I've never forgotten. "I thought silence was noble, but I realized staying silent for too long is how I disappeared." That story taught me something. Silence isn't always strength. Sometimes you don't speak, not because you're forgiving, but because you no longer believe the other person cares enough to listen. You deserve a love where you are fully seen, where your feelings are heard and held with care. And if the person beside you can't recognize that, then holding everything in is no longer an act of love. It's an act of self-harm. Love isn't about shrinking yourself to keep someone else close. True love is the space where you can be fully yourself and still be loved. Number 5, when you hope they'll change, but they stay silent. There's a quiet kind of pain that's easy to miss because it hides behind hope. You keep believing that if you're just a little more patient, they'll understand. If you forgive one more time, they'll finally change. You tell yourself that if you love them long enough, they'll eventually wake up. So you wait. You text first. You make peace first. You give them space so they won't feel pressured. You stay gentle. You stay silent. You keep understanding. But what you receive in return isn't clarity. It's prolonged indifference. So much that you begin to forget where the line even was. You assume their silence means they just need time. But sometimes the truth is harsher. Some people don't change. Not because they can't, but because they don't see why they should. They don't think they've done anything wrong. Why would they? You're always the one reaching out, always the one forgiving. They've never had to learn responsibility and love because you carried it all. Stoicism doesn't teach us to give up on love. It teaches us to give up on illusions. On the belief that someone will become who you hope they'll be, just because you've loved them purely. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Love the truth, not illusions. Act on what you know, not what you wish." If someone keeps ignoring your hurt, what you need isn't more time. It's more truth. The truth that love cannot survive in one direction. A relationship requires movement from both sides. When you take a step back, they must take a step forward. If not, you'll keep retreating until there's nothing left to hold. I once read a woman's story. She had loved a man for 3 years, always the one who initiated, always the one trying to make things better. But every time they fought, he chose silence. Still, she believed, he'll change, he'll see, he'll love me back the way I've loved him. But when she finally walked away, he stayed silent. No questions, no apology, no effort, and that was the moment she woke up. She didn't feel angry anymore, just sorrow, for the years she had spent waiting for someone who was never really coming. That story reminded me, sometimes what you need is not another chance for them, but for yourself, a chance to begin again in a place where love doesn't depend on someone else changing just to feel right. Because real love isn't born from one-sided patience, it's born from mutual growth, when both people are ready to rise, not just one. Number 6, when you stop demanding and start observing. There's a turning point in the healing process that many people don't see coming. It's the moment when you stop waiting for an apology. You no longer need explanations. You don't need them to admit they were wrong. You quietly take a step back, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You no longer chase resolution, and in that exact moment, you begin to see everything more clearly. When you stop reacting, you start observing. And when you observe long enough, you realize this wasn't carelessness, it was choice. They chose silence, they chose distance, they chose avoidance, not because they didn't know how to show up, but because they didn't care enough to try. In the past, you believed you needed to help them understand. You explained, you were patient, you held on to hope, but the more you spoke, the more invisible you felt. The more you cared, the colder they became, and eventually a question crept in. What if the silence was never confusion, but a message you refused to accept? Stoicism teaches us, do not try to change others, change how you see them. And Epictetus said, if you want to be free, learn to expect less. That doesn't mean becoming numb. It means learning not to anchor your peace to those who have not earned that power. When you stop demanding, you start seeing. You begin to notice who is truly trying to hold on to you, and who's only staying because it's convenient, who loves you, and who's merely used to you. And when the truth finally shows itself, it doesn't hurt the way it used to. It wakes you up. I once spoke to a young man after a long breakup. He told me the most painful part wasn't that the person left. It was realizing he had spent so much time trying to keep someone who never tried to keep him. I thought that if I loved her deeply enough, she'd feel it, he said. But what I learned in the end is this. Someone who truly loves you never needs to be convinced. That story stayed with me, because in silence we often see most clearly who is really walking beside us and who is just passing through. When you stop speaking, you begin to hear the real signals, not from words but from actions or the absence of them. Silence isn't always waiting. Sometimes it's an answer, and if you are brave enough to observe instead of react, you'll see it plainly. Not every departure is a loss. Some goodbyes are the first step in returning to yourself. Because the moment you stop demanding change from someone else, you begin offering that change to the one person who truly needs it, yourself. Number 7, when you no longer want them to come back, there is a very particular kind of freedom. It doesn't come from a final conversation or from a long-awaited apology. It arrives quietly on an ordinary morning when you realize you no longer want them to come back. You're not angry. You're not sad. You simply don't need it anymore. You no longer wait for a message that says, I miss you. No more late night calls, no more promises like, next time I'll be different. You no longer hope they'll change. You no longer need them to regret, because now you understand, if they had truly valued you, they would have never lost you in the first place. In the past, you lived in a constant state of waiting for a sign, waiting for them to turn around, waiting for some acknowledgement that you meant something. But now you've stopped waiting because you finally see. Your worth was never in their eyes. It was always in the way you see yourself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "As long as you rely on others to feel worthy, you remain a slave in your own mind." And that's what Stoicism seeks to free us from, not from another person, but from the need for their validation. You don't forgive because they deserve it. You forgive because you deserve peace. You don't move on because the love is gone. You move on because you've loved enough to know someone who doesn't want to stay shouldn't be held on to. I once heard a woman say the day she knew she had truly healed wasn't the day she stopped crying. It was the day someone mentioned his name and her heart didn't flinch. No bitterness, no lingering questions, no why, just silence. And for her, that silence was the sound of healing. That story helped me understand. Letting go is not a single moment, it's a process, a journey from needing closure to needing nothing at all, no longer playing the victim, no longer trying to prove anything, no longer needing to show anyone that you're okay. You simply live, day by day, quietly, steadily, until one day you look back and it doesn't hurt anymore. You just feel gratitude, grateful that you once loved with sincerity, grateful that you had the courage to let go, grateful that now you don't need them to feel whole. And that is the most beautiful kind of freedom, not when you finally get what you wanted, but when you no longer need it to feel at peace. Number 8, when you stop proving and start living right. In the final stage of letting go, something shifts. You no longer need anyone to understand you. You stop explaining. You stop defending yourself. You don't post to prove you're fine. You don't need them to know that you've grown, that you're stronger, that you're doing better. Because eventually you realize, true peace doesn't need recognition. It only needs to be lived. Before you live with the same loop of questions circling in your mind. Do they regret it? Do they miss me? Do they even know what they lost? And those questions kept you stuck in the in-between. Half a step forward, half a glance back. You smiled on the outside, but inside you still waited for one more glance in your direction. But then something changes. One day you stop caring whether they ever look back, because now you're facing forward, toward the light, toward a life that is slowly becoming vibrant again. Not to prove that you're okay, but because you genuinely want to live in a way that feels true. No more shrinking, no more performing, no more shaping yourself into something just to be seen. Stoicism teaches, no one can steal your peace unless you hand it to them. And one of the most common ways we hand it over is by living to prove something to someone who's no longer even part of our lives. You have the right to grieve, to break, to be disappointed. But after all of that, you also have the right to stand up again, without needing an audience. You don't need anyone to declare you strong. You just need to no longer feel weak about what's already behind you. Someone once wrote, I used to think I needed to succeed so my ex would regret losing me. But then I realized, the most beautiful success is the one that needs no explanation. You simply live right, and peace follows. That story captures the essence of letting go. You don't release the past to run away. You do it so you can finally live. You don't go quiet to create distance. You do it to reconnect with yourself. You don't have to move far away or achieve something massive or force yourself to show them. All you need to do is wake up each morning, live kindly, love sincerely, work honestly, and smile without burden, because there's nothing left inside you that needs proving. And when that day comes, you'll realize the only thing you truly need isn't the gaze of the past, but the light from the path you're now walking. So you've made it through the 8 signs that you're truly letting someone go. Not through harsh words, but through the way you now live. Not with bitterness, but with a calm silence. And if you see yourself in any of these moments, then congratulations. Not because you've moved on, but because you're learning how to walk through the pain. Consciously, intentionally, Letting go isn't losing. Letting go is a form of victory. When you no longer need anything external to feel complete inside, as Marcus Aurelius once wrote, no one can take away your inner freedom unless you hand it over. If this video touched you at any point in your journey, let us know by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to the channel so you never miss another moment of clarity and grounded wisdom. Thank you for staying until the very end. This isn't the end, it's the beginning of a version of you that is wiser, clearer, and freer than ever before.